Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the most controversial video games ever made, not because of its content, but because of its initial release. Game-breaking issues plagued this game for months, and it will forever be known as one of the most catastrophically rushed releases of yet another AAA title that promised a little too much to its players. But the development team at CD Projekt Red have been consistently updating this game in an effort to make it resemble the earth-shattering RPG that they promised. For my money, it never even gets close to hitting those heights, but Cyberpunk 2077 today is absolutely worth buying and worth playing. It's not perfect, but it's still pretty good. Be warned, this video will contain spoilers for the story of Cyberpunk 2077 and one of its many endings. The story of Cyberpunk 2077 follows the character simply known as V, a mercenary operating within the fictional city of Night City, a dystopian megacity in California, USA ruled by crime and corruption. In my playthrough, V was formerly employed by one of the megacorporations that control the city, the Arasaka Corporation. By all accounts, an effective counterintelligence officer. Unfortunately, V would be terminated from Arasaka upon accepting an order from his supervisor to murder the director of Arasaka Counterintelligence. Thankfully, however, V is able to get back up on his feet thanks to his friend Jackie, who introduces him to the criminal underworld of Night City. V seemingly excels at his newfound criminal mindset, making a name for himself both on the street as well as among select criminal organizations. Eventually, V is recruited by a high-profile fixer to retrieve an experimental biochip from Arasaka Tower. V hesitantly accepts the job, and for the most part, it goes according to plan. That is until V and Jackie accidentally walk into a fucking coup. V's entire team is killed during their attempted escape from Arasaka Tower, including Jackie, and V is forced to insert the biochip into his own neural port to keep it from basically imploding. Upon his return to the fixer that hired him, V gets a bullet to the brain for his troubles. For all intents and purposes, that should be where this story ends, but little did literally anyone in this game realize, the biochip V stole contained the AI construct of Johnny Silverhand, a rocker boy turned terrorist from 50 years prior to the game's story. Good news, the biochip is effectively keeping V alive. Bad news, it's also overriding his own consciousness with that of Silverhand's. Naturally, neither of them are happy about this, V because he's going to essentially become another person, and Johnny because, well, he's an asshole. Now, with his time running out, V sets out to find any possible way to remove the biochip without killing himself, all the while trying to figure out what's really going on at Arasaka. There's a ton of story in this game, so we're just gonna narrow it down to the big moments. V teams up with a group of nomads known as the Aldecaldos. These guys are basically Hell's Angels on steroids, minus all of the horrific crimes. He confides in one of their more rebellious members, Panam, with whom he develops a genuine romantic connection with. And yes, you're goddamn right I chose Panam as the main love interest, because if you don't, you're stupid. With her help, V is able to track down an Arasaka scientist who is responsible for creating the biochip. V tries to force him to remove it, but the scientist professes that there simply isn't a way to safely remove the chip without frying V's brain. Shortly after this, V works with a former Arasaka enforcer to get in contact with Hanako Arasaka, the daughter of the old man that got choked the fuck out in the game's opening. After some trials and tribulations, Hanako offers V an easy way out in exchange for cooperation with the Arasaka Corporation. V and Johnny, after everything they've been through at this point in the game, understandably say fuck that and proceed to storm Arasaka Tower, effectively wiping it off the map, even eventually killing the walking tank of a fucking unit of a man that killed Johnny 50 years ago. Eventually, V and Johnny are able to find their way to the machine that allows them to enter a kind of cyberspace, where the construct of a woman named Alt, who is Johnny's old girlfriend, surmises that she can remove Johnny from the biochip, but in doing so, Johnny will be stuck in this cyberspace, and V will still only have a few months to live before his body gives out and dies. Surprisingly, Johnny offers himself up to be removed from the chip, and V reluctantly agrees. Johnny says his final goodbyes to V, telling him to never stop fighting. In the epilogue of the game, V is now one of the top fixers and mercenaries in Night City, and maintains his relationship with Pan Am, even though it is slightly uneasy between the two of them. And the game closes with V taking one last job, seemingly to rob a literal space casino orbiting Earth. Okay, so obviously I skipped over a ton of story elements and plot points, but that's just because this game is so fucking dense. Seriously, this is one of the most packed stories I think I've ever seen in a video game. So much happens over the course of its roughly 40-hour story. You meet so many well-developed and fascinating characters and get genuinely invested in them and their stories, not to mention the themes of existential dread and pondering of mortality that perpetuate the game's entire length. There's just a lot to unpack. Although I do think the story definitely could have been better. Personally, I think CD Projekt Red missed a great opportunity to tell an anti-establishment, pro-individual story here without sounding overly pretentious. Whereas instead they chose to focus on a story that primarily centers on the fear of death and the futility of fighting the system. I say that because the ending that I previously described in my summary of the story is actually a secret ending that is only accessible through specific dialogue in a certain conversation about 3/4 of the way through the game, and supposedly is also dependent on your interactions with Johnny Silverhand throughout the game as well. Literally every main ending of the game is either depressingly bittersweet or just depressing. I think this game could have done with a couple more upbeat endings, just because the ones that are real downers just kind of hurt the game's replayability, at least in my opinion. Outside of the story, I do think that a lot of the characters were severely underwritten and underutilized. Specifically that of Dexter Deshawn, Evelyn Parker, Adam Smasher, and even Johnny Silverhand himself. Dexter Deshawn is depicted as a cold, calculated, but also fair fixer. Honestly, I don't even blame him for cutting his losses and trying to kill V. It made sense given the situation and his character. I got genuinely excited to see how he'd shape up as a mini antagonist throughout the story, but then he's killed off literally in the next scene when V is revealed to still be alive. Like, what? They dedicated like half the prologue to setting this dude up as some kind of big threat just to pop him in the noggin like immediately after. Adam Smasher is set up to be an absolute fucking unit of an antagonist. Between his terrifying presentation and his scary ass voice, I am truly bewildered as to why he's only in roughly 2 hours of a roughly 60-hour game. Seriously, it's criminal how they didn't give this character any more screen time to really let him chew the scenery and establish himself as an interesting yet menacing villain. Instead, he's relegated to being a last-minute final boss with no build-up or real anticipation. Evelyn Parker is pitched as a classy, albeit sleazy, femme fatale who is way smarter than people give her credit for, but is also way too ambitious for her own good. She even offers V the chance to double-cross Dexter Deshawn simply because she doesn't respect him enough to honor their original agreement. How do they handle this character, you ask? Well, after the opening of the game, she is kidnapped, raped, and mind-fucked into oblivion until V and her girlfriend come to save her, after which point she kills herself due to the trauma. Look, I'm not saying that doesn't make sense for the character in that situation, but what I am saying is that it's an incredibly lackluster way to end a character's story that we spent so much time setting up. And finally, the man of the hour, Johnny Silverhand. Johnny had the potential to be one of the most fascinating characters in this game, besides the fact that he's played by Keanu Reeves. Johnny Silverhand grew up in a world where he watched corporations basically suck the world dry, taking everything away from the common man, effectively eliminating the idea of individuality from the system, and just generally fucking everyone over. He has a genuine appreciation for individuality and values true freedom. All the while he himself is blatantly egotistical, narcissistic, and selfish. That is such an interesting dichotomy of character that the game doesn't even attempt to explore. Instead of an interesting, complex character, Johnny honestly comes off as an impulsive dickhead for pretty much the whole game, outside of 2 or 3 sequences where he gets the chance to show a shred of humility. All that being said, I do still think this game is worth playing. While the story isn't perfect and they could have done a lot more with the characters, it's still a beautiful story of confronting morality and the value of life. Not to mention the endless gameplay improvements that CDPR have made to this game since its launch. The gunplay and melee combat is tighter and more satisfying, the driving is significantly improved, and performance is much more stable than it was when it initially launched. This video is roughly 2 years in the making. I've been wanting to make it ever since I finished the main story back in late 2021. But I got lazy. I was comfortable making dumb, easy commentary videos about nonsense that I didn't care about for the sake of easy views. But in December of 2022, I went through the worst breakup I've ever had. It was a relationship that lasted 4 years and was ended for reasons that to this day have not been disclosed to me. 2 months later, I lost the best job I've ever had over a glorified technicality. I've been having panic attacks since January, and this last week is the first time in 3 months I've been able to get more than 2 hours of sleep every night. But I realized I simply couldn't give up. I had to stop feeling sorry for myself and do what was best for me. I think the developers at CDPR had this same mindset when approaching the post-launch cycle for Cyberpunk. In the eyes of their fans, they made themselves into a public laughingstock. A game that they had been putting 7 years of their lives into creating was deemed one of the biggest AAA gaming disasters of all time. And despite all the hate, half of their talented staff exiting the company to start their own studio, and an immense loss of respect from their community, they banded together and pulled every stop they could to bring Cyberpunk 2077 back from the dead. And not just make it playable, but to shape it into a genuinely fun, immersive experience that everyone wanted. And I think for the most part, they succeeded. I have never seen a game with so much hate behind it bounce back the way that Cyberpunk did. It's honestly amazing. So, is Cyberpunk 2077 actually worth playing in 2023? Yes, without a doubt. I genuinely think it's one of the better open world, story-driven games of the last couple years, and you should absolutely pick it up if you get the chance. Thank you all for watching. I couldn't be more grateful for your support, and I want you guys to know you mean the world to me. I'll see all of you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.